Good luck with the quotes. I think they're in the right order, but we'll see, okay? One thing that I have discovered on my own journey and getting to work with a number of people is that we can do lots of spiritual practice. We can do lots of spiritual education, kind of think, someone will, like this talk, you'll think, okay, I've got it. And then this afternoon, the very thing I'm talking about will come up. We don't even recognize it. We don't recognize that it's going on in us. It wouldn't even occur to us that it was the very thing that's playing out in our life right now. I have the unfortunate example of myself to use as this. When at the time that I retired, I was already experiencing a good deal of inner quiet, almost a sense of no mind, great expanse. Now, this is usually when I'm by myself, okay? Like if I'm out paddleboarding on the lake or hiking, or we did a lot of landscaping last year and a lot of work with building rock walls. I wouldn't know it until afterwards, but there was no familiar sense of self. And you might be sitting there going, who would want that? Until you get to experience it, it's pretty incredible. Because what's left is the peace, the love, the flow. One of the things I got to see was how when we're in the flow, how much guidance is just naturally in the flow. I started out my path really hearing guidance. And as I was working in the yard and building these stone walls, I would walk up to the street where the pile of rocks was, and I'd be drawn to a rock. And it would fit in the wall perfectly. Without me thinking, without me efforting. Can you just even get into the idea of no efforting? I'm just pointing this because most people don't really take this spiritual path all the way. But let me tell you, it's pretty incredible. In contrast to that, another thing that was happening when I retired, we'd hired a gentleman to increase the size of our parking, which in the mountains is a big deal, lots of excavation. At the time I retired, the project had already been going on 9 months, and he said it would be done in 2 weeks. This is how things go in the mountains. And almost all summer, Stuart can testify to this, he kind of went dark on us in the summer, meaning that he wouldn't respond to any calls or texts. Or if he responded, he would say, okay, I'll be there, but never show up. Or he would show up and stay for max 4 hours, mainly 2, and we couldn't tell that anything had been done. Are you feeling the constriction? Maybe you've been there, in your own life with something. I felt powerless, helpless. I was pretty much in constant judgment of him. He was the devil incarnate. And all I wanted was him to get done, right? Did I ever reflect on what might be going on for me spiritually? No. That's the amazing thing, right? It never occurred to me. This might be about you, Scott. It was all about him. So towards the end and by the way, I was suffering. Do you know what I mean? I was suffering. And what a contrast it was. I'd go out on the lake or be working, and then I'd go and look at the wall and So some of you gave me books as parting gifts when I retired. By the way, you should see my name tag. I thought it would say Minister Emeritus. It says former minister. Son of a bitch. All that is ever spoken in this church is truth. There's never any sugarcoating, right? Former minister. But for my retirement, Donna Cooper gave me this book, The Disappearance of the Universe. How many of you have read this book? I highly recommend this book, especially if you're at all interested in the Course in Miracles. It's written by Gary Renard, and it's about the Course in Miracles. It's similar to the Course. Two ascended beings appear to Gary multiple times over a series of years to really educate him so that he can bring more understanding of the Course. And it impacted me in three big ways. One, as a student of the Course myself, it explained so much that I didn't realize I didn't really understand in the Course. Two, it was totally affirming to my own path and helped me understand a few things on my path that were not clear to me. But third, and the most poignant, is the whole book is about forgiveness. It was, first of all, shocking to me at all the times we have focused on forgiveness in this community, and yet it had never occurred to me to practice forgiveness with this contractor. And we'll talk about, hopefully, if Spirit is with me, we'll talk about that in just a minute. But why? And here's what they said. They said that if you were to really have known Jesus, and if you could boil down the message of what he really said, not what was added that people thought he might have said, but what he really said, it was all about the power of forgiveness. Now, why? Because I loved that you were, Dennis, you said, let's keep it simple in this complex world. How, with all the complexity of the world, could forgiveness be the path back to God? And the answer is that, and they did a beautiful job in this, if you're willing to practice forgiveness with the littlest and the biggest things in your life, it breaks that pattern of the ego that just choose on whatever's going wrong or how they've done you wrong and your resentment and everything. It takes a moment to break that, and you have that space to remember whatever you know spiritually. Like just when they first mentioned it, I reflected on the contractor. I realized it's the thread that each of us is a perfect spirit. We're an expression of the one Spirit. Our nature is undeniably perfect. Now we all have an ego. His ego is challenging. Two of our neighbors, three of us in total, have hired him to do projects. Every one of them will say, "Woo, challenging." But he suffers in that at some level too. He may not be conscious of his suffering, but he's suffering. Each of us that doesn't live the nature that is our nature, at some level we suffer with it. And so things began to soften for me around him. Then the other thing that happened that was really powerful is I participated in a retreat. It was a teaching retreat. We just didn't sit around and say Om all day. We were taught something and we worked with it. And one of the main subjects was attachment. Now, I knew something about attachment, And as they were going through, you know how sometimes when there's a teaching, you're feeling really good about yourself? Yeah, I'm not that attached anymore. Things are going really well. And if you don't know what attachment comes out of the nature that we are children, and as infants and children, we needed to be taken care of. So we get a subconscious belief that the world provides what you need. Out there is what you need. And when it gives you safety or gives you nourishment or makes you feel good, it's natural for the ego to get attached to it. We want to hold to it. So I'm actually going to read you a few things that I read about attachment. I thought these were great. So attachment can show up as wanting to get, wanting to grasp, wanting to hold, wanting to hoard, wanting to buy, wanting to own. If you're attached to something and you don't have it, you're going to exert a lot of energy to have it. If you're still not having it, you're going to be judgmental and jealous of those that do have it. Or if someone tries to take it away from you, you're going to grasp and use a lot of energy. You need to control your life. I know all of you are free of that. But it turns out, was not. But I was, feeling really good until at the end, the presenter goes, oh, I almost forgot to mention one of the biggest attachments, that things need to go your way. Shit. I was totally trapped in that. I wanted that parking lot to be done in 2 weeks. I wanted the guy to respond to me. I wanted him to follow through with what he said. After all, I would have. And so I started to work with my attachment. And here's what's interesting about learning about what's happening to us spiritually, which mostly focus around the ego, because spirit is in you. Spirit can't be, when spirit leaves you, you're dead. And you are spirit, so that part of you goes on. Your ego, left behind. Lovely. Really lovely. But as you get to know how your ego's operating, you're not getting rid of the ego, but you have the opportunity to become conscious about what's going on, which softens it and allows more space for spirit to act. So they said, there's going to be something, there's some fuel under your attachment. There's some reason you're attached to what you're attached to, and often that will not be easy to feel. But instead of trying to control the world so that all your attachments are met, you can just go down, feel what's underneath it, see if you can't be with it long enough to have it relax, and then that attachment will literally begin to dissolve for you. Doesn't mean you still don't have desires. Charles Fillmore did a great job of saying true desire is from spirit. And this presenter said it over and over again. Desire is great. Not so much ego desire, because ego desire, want, need. But when you feel the desire for something that seems bigger, that doesn't seem to go, that stays with you, that's true for you. It's passion. It's what we live for. So as I sensed into it for me, it was interesting. It was like I didn't exist, like there was nothing there. Like if things don't go my way, then I don't have any influence. I'm not important. It was easier to experience as an adult. I could imagine how challenging that would be as a child when the ego is formed. So I understood why I want things to go my way, and why he said, most people do. He said, that's an attachment that most people have. But sure enough, it began to even soften more deeply for me. And just as there was guidance in putting together the rock walls, there was a shift that happened for me in how I approached him. even if it was just an energetic shift, right? You know, this book, and we've taught this forever, but the ascended beings in this book said, when you get down to the bottom of what your issue is, the universe no longer needs to bring you that lesson. Never. And so he started to communicate with us. We found out he was having trouble getting equipment, but he had a lead on equipment. The equipment showed up. The wall got done. It became much more effortless. Yes, I still needed to stay on him, right? But I was guided, not only when to do it, but how to do it. Stuart said, "You got to get rough with him." Do you remember that? And I noticed I had to get rough with him. But that wasn't the guidance I was getting. The guidance I was getting was that was just going to drive him further away. It's interesting. We had a rough winter. We had so much snow that water was literally pouring through the wall, and part of the wall collapsed. He hasn't been back. He says he will be back. It's almost comical, you know? It's like, well, I guess I wasn't quite done with the lesson. I have a little bit more work to do on this lesson. So there's a couple of quotes that came to me. By the way, speaking of attachment, so in this book, when they mentioned that Jesus' message is about forgiveness, they did the most incredible job of pulling quotes out of the Bible. I thought, I'd never thought of it that way. So I wanted to find it for you. And Stuart was great, because I'm like rereading this whole book. I read it, at the end of summer, so it's been a while. Rereading it, I can't find it. And then as I was talking to Stuart, I went, oh, I'm attached to finding it. I'm attached because I don't really, you're not going to believe me what they said, and I couldn't possibly recreate it. And I want you to come away with a good feeling for the talk. It gives me value. I stopped looking for it. I'll probably find it this afternoon. Right? I mean, that's the way it is. I probably could have read it 5 times and not recognized it, because the universe is saying, lesson. You have a lesson here. But listen to this. If you think attachment is a new concept, Matthew 6:19, do not store up for yourselves treasures on earth, where moth and rust consume and where thieves break in and steal, but store up for yourself treasures in heaven, inside. Your connection with who you are as a spiritual being is a treasure. Store up for yourself treasures in heaven, where neither moth nor rust consume, and where thieves do not break in and steal. For where your treasure is, there your heart will be also. Remember, the heart is the organ, isn't it? Not the physical organ. The heart in you is where spirit expresses. It's where spirit makes itself known. And then the head works with interpreting that and bringing it into manifestation or bringing it into action. That's where your heart is. When you open to the treasure that is spirit in you. And then here's another one that we should hear it. I should hear it every day. Why do you seek the speck in your neighbor's eye, but don't notice the log in your own? Or how can you say to your neighbor, let me take the speck out of your eye while you've got this log in your own eye? You hypocrite. First take the log out of your own eye, and then you'll see clearly to take the speck out of your neighbor's eye. Well, hell, I'm not sure there's even a speck in your neighbor's eye. It's not really our business, is it, to try and change the ego of someone else? We have the opportunity to work on ourselves. So why can't we remember then, after we know, for heaven's sake, I was the minister of this church for 17 years. We probably talked about, in those 17 years, I bet we talked about forgiveness 2,000 or 3,000 times. Here's the key. Attachment is an activity of the heart that is often unconscious and based in emotion, not based in intellect, in logic, in knowing. It is a knee-jerk emotional reaction. And if we don't bring awareness to it, then what happens is we are lived it. We are lived by it. And I don't know about you, but I suspect most of the suffering that I do is out of attachment. Because the things that I'm no longer attached to, I seem to be able to just roll with. Oh, here we are. The guidance arises to me because life is challenging, right? Life can be challenging. But if you're not attached to the outcome, then you're in touch with who you are as a spiritual being because you've not gotten pulled out in some way into the ego, which edges God out. You'll be guided. I think one of the things that this contractor might have experienced in me was instead of feeling powerless and weak, I was feeling strong and powerful in approaching him. That's the experience of spirit in us, not ego strength, not bullying like we were talking about, just a sense of I can handle this and everything's going to be okay. Can you believe it? We're 5 minutes over how much time I've been given. Maybe one of the nice things about not working here anymore is I can disobey. Let me just quickly tell you one other thing that's really great about using forgiveness and investigating our attachments, in that then we start opening to what's happening, as we say in Unity, the divine order of what's happening. They tell a story in this book that I found very powerful about a woman professor who loved what she did. And she had a male student who did not perform in the class. He didn't show up for class very often. The work he turned in was not acceptable, and she failed him. He came to her when he saw the grade and threatened her and said, I'm going to say, if you don't give me a passing grade, I'm going to say that you made sexual advances to me and that you failed me because I refused those advances. And being a woman of integrity, she said, okay. And the news picked it up like crazy. It was everywhere in her town. And then 2 other students came forward and said she had done the same thing, who had failing grades. And even though she had all the evidence, she had copies of all their papers and their projects that were failing, the university let her go. And what she found out quickly was she could not get a job as a professor any longer, that there was a network, and that news got out. And so she started practicing forgiveness. And they talked about how in her journey, remember, forgiveness is not a one-time thing, right? They talked about for years it could creep up on her. And she'd feel the hatred and the anger, but she'd just forgive, break that pattern, right? And come back into, what do I know about myself and these people? And pretty quickly, and quite kind of amazing to her, she felt a certain tenacity, that kept her up, kept working to find a job. She found a job that she said was equally as satisfying in a totally different field. Of course, it used the skills that she had already learned, but she came to realize, I would have never gotten to see the breadth of what I could do if this had not happened. And so what they're trying to demonstrate here is if we can break the trend of the ego, begin to orient to what spirit is, and to recognize that spirit is about bringing us to greater and greater wholeness, greater and greater expression, to give us a breadth of our life experience, I don't know, maybe this is the only time we'll be here on earth. Why not open up and see what the possibilities are? And so this week I have 2 assignments for you. One, I want you to revisit forgiveness. Who cares how you do it? Probably not good to say, "You son of a bitch, I forgive you." Try and stay to, okay, if I was going to forgive this person, who is this person? Yes, they're a beautiful expression of spirit. Recognize that underneath whatever is being shown to you, they're the same as you. We are one. And then however you want to go from there. For me, it was pretty easy to go, I'm suffering over his ego, and he's suffering over it too. And people suffer over my ego. And yet people forgive me for it. I can forgive him. And then if you want to move a step deeper, if you're ready to transcend this, start listing out what you're attached to. You don't really have, you can explore them, but that's one of the things we had to do in this retreat. We had to list out as many things as we could think that we were attached to. After I got done with the whole notebook, it starts to get a little overwhelming. But it starts a shift, starts giving more room for spirit. Because you see, our attachments are unconscious, most of them. Bring them to consciousness. See if you too. Yeah, this touches me. Because it's quite surprising to me. See if you too can't live a life with no monkey mind. Feeling expanded. No sense of body feeling boundless. Resting in peace and in love. So satisfying. Namaste.